Hi there. In this week's edition of The Wrap, we're looking at President Cyril Ramaphosa's long anticipated State Capture Commission testimony and why it paled in comparison with the former Mrs Gigaba's receipts that she also brought to the Commission this week. Plus, we tell you why we celebrated Freedom Day despite the challenges our country still faces and how Americans fell for a fake news story saying they could only have one beef burger a month. So, let's dive into your weekly simple news updates brought to you by me, Verashni Pillay, and the Explained Akosa team. First up, our take. Freedom for one is freedom for all. On the 27th of April, earlier this week, 27 years ago, happy crown birthday to us, all South Africans of eligible voting age took to the polls for the very first time in a democracy. That day brought with it a renewed sense of hope and healing to a racially divided nation. After that, we were dubbed the Rainbow Nation, and we all learned the meaning of the word Ubuntu. But when you take a closer look at South Africa, it's easy to see the darkness swallowing up that rainbow. So you're not wrong to ask how a country can celebrate freedom, as we did this past Tuesday, when the majority of its people don't have access to water, food, shelter, and an education. So what's free about Freedom Day? Well, there are some things we can celebrate with thanks to international relations scholar Oscar van Heerden. Here is a list. Firstly, in 1994, only 36% of people had access to electricity in their homes. Now, over 84% have electricity in their homes. 9 out of 10 public schools are now no-fee schools. That means the majority of our people can attend schools. Thirdly, 3.2 million free houses have been built since 1994. Going back to 1994, only 54% of South Africans could read and write. Now, 94.3% of people can do so. So that means our literacy levels have shot way up. Also in 1994, 51% of South Africans had access to clean drinking water. Now, over 88% have that kind of access. Okay, so next, we know what you're going to say next. What about our corrupt government? We agree that the 9 years under former President Jacob Zuma drilling a gaping hole into our democracy were not great. But unlike many other countries, we didn't just bury it and move on. When Spanish dictator Francisco Franco died in 1975, the country's political parties across the spectrum agreed on the Pact of Forgetting, which was actually passed into legislation. And they did this to avoid dealing with Franco's brutal legacy and not coming to terms with what happened or getting accountability from those who did it. We're not like that as South Africans. Just in this example, we have the Commission of Inquiry of State Capture, the Hawks, and also the Constitutional Court taking those responsible for those wasted years to task. South Africa's democracy and those upholding it should not be taken for granted. We know there's a lot more that needs to be done, but we should also applaud how far we've come. Moving on to the big story. Over the past 2 days, President Cyril Ramaphosa made his hotly anticipated first appearance before the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture in his capacity as ANC president. He will appear again in May to testify about his time as former deputy president of the country at the height of state capture. But, given the ruling party's policy of deploying its members into key government positions, the issues of government and political party bled into each other. Ramaphosa kicked off on Wednesday with a nearly hour-long opening statement. It sounded a lot like his annual State of the Nation address. Here he emphasized his responsibility towards the Commission, perhaps in an intended contrast to former President Jacob Zuma undermining the rule of law by refusing to show up. The big focus in Ramaphosa's testimony this week was on our wrecked state-owned enterprises, which became a feeding ground for the corrupt, as dubious Gupta-linked officials were deployed to run them. The appointments, according to Ramaphosa, were not endorsed by the ANC's deployment committee, which he chaired as deputy president. Now, he defended that by saying he wasn't aware of it, but he fell short of outright condemning the party's deployment policies. And that's not great. We'd like to see a depoliticized civil service running our state apparatus, but it looks like we're a long way away from that. Ramaphosa also said that he was not aware of the state capture project while it was happening. He said, some of these state capture issues became only evident in time as we moved on. He also said that the cabinet had a silo approach and almost everybody kept to their lane. He means different ministries didn't know what was happening in individual ministries. However, Ramaphosa did acknowledge that the ANC was, quote-unquote, accused number one when it comes to corruption, with a candour he's regularly practiced when it comes to acknowledging where his party has gone wrong, but it can come across as empty rhetoric. However, in response to the corruption plaguing its members, he spoke about the now infamous step-aside rule and said those who don't do so will be suspended. He'll get a chance to prove that very soon. By our calculations, today is the deadline for the party's Secretary-General Ace Magashule to step aside, given that he's facing charges. If he doesn't do so, he should be suspended, if Ramaphosa is to be taken at his word from his testimony this week. So, Ramaphosa's testimony thus far has been very broad with little detail on specific wrongdoing. But Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo seems to be on the case. He has repeatedly asked Ramaphosa for details about what exactly the ANC admitted it did wrong during the state capture era, so, in his word, there are no repeats going forward. Ramaphosa has agreed to do so by the end of his testimony, which is set to conclude in late May. We'll give you the full story once it lands. Onto your briefs. You've probably heard by now that My Octopus Teacher, the breakout local documentary that became a surprise global hit, won this year's Oscar for Best Documentary at the 93rd Academy Awards that took place this week. Now, the docu follows filmmaker and diver Craig Foster as he explores an underwater kelp forest near Cape Town and bonds with an octopus living in the area. You've probably seen the documentary on Netflix during lockdown when the most exploring and bonding you got to do was with your fridge. But if you haven't seen it, we hope you've at least watched the hilarious local spoof gently teasing the incredible earnestness of the original. We'll link to it below. The film has won a string of previous awards and beat out some serious competition to take home the famous golden statue. Audiences across the world were deeply taken with the interspecies friendship at the heart of the film and the environmental concerns it raised. Many fans have sworn off eating the animal. Now, the film was directed by James Reed and Pippa Elrich, and they accepted the award, giving a shout out to South African audiences who were watching. Previous local winners have done the same in years past. There was Charlize Theron's Best Actress win in 2003, where she said hello to all her people watching from South Africa, which she called her home country, and Gavin Hood's Tsotsi, which won for Best Foreign Film in 2006. And there Gavin said something along the lines of, Nkosi Sikelele Africa, God bless Africa. And where was Craig, the man at the center of the docu? Why, up coast on assignment, of course, according to his team. We wonder what nature journey he'll be taking us on next. Moving on, in other Oscar-related news, a round of applause and a standing ovation for the world's most prestigious film award for finally reaching 20th century levels of inclusivity. This year's Oscars saw a record of 15 women winning 17 awards for sound, production design, original screenplay, and documentary feature. But not all South Africans made us proud. Margaret Gardner, the former Miss South Africa who became our first Miss Universe back in 1978, is now a journalist working with the Hollywood Foreign Press Association. She has taken to Twitter to defend herself for mistaking one black man for another. She claims a Zoom technical glitch was responsible for her seemingly confusing Oscar winner Daniel Kaluuya with fellow black actor Leslie Odom Jr. during questions in the Academy press room. Now, the Hollywood Foreign Press Association itself, which is responsible for the Golden Globes, has not had a single black journalist amongst its 87 members since 2002, and it has been riddled with queries and claims about why its nominations at the Golden Globes often tend to be really white. There's many other problems with this body, which we pointed out in a recent video. Link to that below as well. More news from the Commission. Norma Ngoma, the soon-to-be ex-wife of former Minister of Home Affairs, Finance and Public Enterprises, Mrs Gigaba, dished the chai, hot and spicy, on the eve of Freedom Day about Gigaba's involvement with the Guptas. If we could describe it in one word, it would simply be yo. A bit of background. Ngoma turned on Gigaba after their marriage fell apart. She then made a beeline for the Zondo Commission. But Gigaba must have managed to persuade otherwise because she then tried to back out of testifying. Too late, Norma. She was issued with a summons, so had little choice in the matter. But that did not mean she was a reluctant witness. Oh no. Here are her hottest allegations. She said that the Guptas had a money counter at their property that looked a lot like an ATM. It would dispense loads of cash at the press of a button. She said cash seemed to follow her husband everywhere she went. He paid in cash for all sorts of things, including for renovations to his father's home in KwaZulu-Natal and to buy those snappy suits the former minister was so fond of. She also said that Gigaba visited the Gupta house in Saxonwold on several occasions, not just twice as he previously claimed. He tried to delete data from Ngoma's phone showing repeated visits, she said. She also said that the Gupta wanted him to head key portfolios like finance, public enterprises, and home affairs so that they could easily permeate and influence operations. But Ngoma said that Gigaba started to resent the pressure. When he didn't oblige to requests, he was told to remember why he was appointed. Now, Gigaba did try to stop her from testifying at the Zondo Commission and also asked her to delete images of her Instagram and phone that showed her lavish lifestyle, Gupta-sponsored holidays, and even a picture of her getting henna at the Gupta wedding that took place in Sun City. Remember, Norma Gigaba was quite the Instagram influencer when she was married to Gigaba. So thanks, Norma. You and your Instagram account have done the nation a service. On to some sport news. Cricket South Africa's governance has been a mess for years. It seems a group of cronies have been hanging on to power at the body, which is independent from government and is meant to administer all aspects of the sport locally. But things got so bad in its governance structures that back in 2012, an inquiry headed by retired Judge Chris Nicholson highlighted issues of corporate governance and mismanagement. He called for the appointment of an independent board and an independent chairperson. But those fighting against reform have resisted change time and time again. So Minister of Sports, Art and Culture, Natim Tetwa, was forced to step in. Now look, the government rightfully gets a lot of flack for meddling in state bodies, but this time it was warranted. After Nicholson's recommendations were ignored by CSA, Tetwa appointed an interim board last year. Long story short, the Members' Council, which is the highest decision-making body and policy maker at the CSA, continued to make things difficult for this board. It even mounted something of an internal coup against adopting a memorandum of incorporation to allow recommended changes to the board structure. This effectively held the entire sport of cricket hostage in South Africa because then Minister Tetwa had no choice but to step in. He exercised his right to basically step in and take a hand in what was happening in terms of the Sport Act. But the problem with that is that the International Cricket Council effectively says that there can't be any political interference in cricket within a country. So we were at risk of not being recognized internationally, taking us back to pre-1994 isolation days. Thankfully, following Tetwa's decision to play tough, he was planning to gazette the new policy today, which is Friday. Cricket bosses put aside their differences to save the beautiful game and adopt the new MOI. So all's well that ends well. Now we just need the Proteas men to whip up their skill and give South Africa some cricketing kudos. After all, the women's team has done so time and again. Can they please learn from them? Moving on to some international news, what's happening in India? A new COVID-19 variant called B.1.617 is driving a deadly second wave across that country. Since the start of April, daily infection rates have surpassed 200,000. That means 200,000 people are getting infected a day. In the last week alone, 300,000 new cases were reported every day, BBC reported, and loads of people are dying. The capital, Delhi, is most affected, but reports suggest that the virus is spreading to smaller cities as well. As the world looks on, hospitals in India are beyond overwhelmed. There aren't enough beds or oxygen, and people who desperately need treatment are being turned away only for them to die on the streets. People have taken to social media to ask for medical assistance. Makeshift cemeteries and car parks and open fields are running 24/7. But look, the variant alone is not the cause of this devastating second wave in the country. India unwisely lifted its lockdown restrictions in December ahead of election seasons. That's right, politicians thought that this would be a good idea. People flocked to the election rallies held by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and at the same time, they attended huge religious gatherings. So it was the perfect storm for super spreader events. Thankfully, foreign aid from multiple countries has arrived or have been promised, but will it be enough? Authorities fear not, but then they should have done more to protect their citizens. Staying on international news, Biden is not declaring a war on meat, despite what Republicans might say. Can you imagine the face of the millions of meat-loving Americans who thought that Democratic President Joe Biden wanted to take away their beloved beef because it's not sustainable for the planet? But Biden is not taking away America's Big Macs. It's just unfortunate that news publication Mail Online reported it that way. The publication was referring to an academic paper that was in no way connected to Biden, which noted that if Americans reduced their beef consumption by 90%, there would be a 51% reduction in diet-related U.S. greenhouse gas emissions between 2016 and 2030. Fox News interpreted that as Biden allowing Americans to eat only one burger a month. His opposition, the Republicans, went berserk, using it as leverage to bring down Biden. The panic reached a fever pitch when a former economic advisor to Donald Trump said that Biden even wanted Americans to drink, wait for it, plant-based beer. What is plant-based beer? We're not sure. Don't tell them that is how all beer is made. There's no such thing as meat-based beer. At least we hope there isn't. And lastly, our usual accountability monitor. Weren't you just furious when you read about how the Gupta family so easily bought so many of South Africa's politicians, which led to much of our economic and political demise? Don't you just want to see them punished? Well, then you'll be pleased to know that the United Kingdom has placed sanctions on 3 corruption-accused Gupta brothers, Ajay, Atul, and Rajesh, as well as their associate Salim Essa, aka the 4th Gupta brother. The US imposed similar sanctions on the Guptas in 2019. The move by the UK comes as it cracks down on corrupt individuals who are using the country as a safe haven for their assets. 22 other individuals from around the globe have also been named. Now, if only India and Dubai, where the bros are hiding, would follow suit. Remember, the Guptas withdrew from the Zondo Commission early on after they were not allowed to testify via video, so they've not been brought to justice or made to explain what they did. Extradition to bring them here to face justice can only happen once criminal charges are brought against them, which will hopefully happen very soon as the Commission starts to wrap up its work. That's it from us at The Wrap, a product of Explained.co.za. Simple news summaries for busy people. Remember to share the love, tell your friends to sign up for the updates at explained.co.za/subscribe. Till next time, goodbye from the team.